So the microbes in the gut have several functions that can be characterized as metabolic, protective, and structural. And so some of the metabolic functions include nutrient metabolism, and I have some examples on the slide. So for instance, the gut microbes, some of them ferment fiber to short-chain fatty acids, and I have that highlighted for a very important reason, because that's one of the key mechanisms for cancerous reduction. And then these gut microbes are involved in producing several B vitamins like thiamine, riboflavin, B12, and so on, that can then be absorbed. And then it also helps with the absorption of certain minerals, including calcium, iron, and magnesium. So protective functions include the good bacteria helping to strengthen the mucosal barrier of the gut and preventing the increase of harmful organisms in our body. Gut microbes are also important in the function of the gut as an immune organ system and also can have an impact on how medications are metabolized, which can basically impact the effectiveness of the medications. So looking at this illustration, there are various factors that are known to impact the composition of the
Apologies.
okay, hopefully I wasn't muted for long, but um, so there's various factors that can impact the composition of the gut microbiota. Some of these factors are fortunately modifiable and could be the focus of interventions to improve the diversity of the microbes in the gut. So during pregnancy, the fetus is exposed to microbes which start the seeding process of their developing microbiome. The type of delivery, so vaginal versus C-section, has an impact on the types of microbes that the infant is exposed to. Also, breastfeeding versus formula feeding during infancy also has an impact on the gut microbe diversity. As individuals age, the alpha diversity or diversity within an individual increases, but then eventually, as individuals become older, that diversity does decrease, which is one of the reasons why older individuals are at increased risk for diseases. And over time, the beta diversity or the differences between individuals decreases over time. So, in addition to delivery methods, infant feeding, and age, these are some of the other factors that can affect the composition of the gut microbiota. The modifiable ones include nutrition, exercise, weight management, smoking, stress, the management of chronic diseases, and the use of certain medications like antibiotics. Why is the diversity and balance of the microbiota important? Well, an imbalance of gut microbiomes, otherwise known as dysbiosis, has several implications. Dysbiosis is characterized by a decrease in the diversity of the gut microbes, a decrease in the good bacteria, and an increase in the bad bacteria, including pathogens, which can increase the risk of acute and chronic illnesses. This imbalance causes tight junctions along the GI tract tissue to become loose. So if you look at this diagram, you see there are these tight junctions which keep these cells close to each other. And then on the right-hand side, there are gaps that now exist. Well, that means there's an increase in gut permeability. Um, so that can lead to inflammation. That should be an increase in gut permeability. And that can also lead to altered immune function, and both inflammation and altered immune function can be triggers for cancer. So from birth, the developing immune system is exposed to microbes. Over time, these microbes educate the immune system to distinguish dangerous pathogens from harmless or beneficial microbes. As noted, issues with immune function can be a trigger for cancer. The mucus that lines the intestines plays a role in immune function by signaling the innate immune system, which is the first line of nonspecific immunity, to fight against harmful pathogens and cancer cells. This defense includes good gut microbes destroying these harmful substances. So, gut microbes are able to help with immune function via various mechanisms, including what are called toll-like receptors or bacterial metabolites, like the short-chain fatty acids, which leads to the production of various byproducts, including IgA. Then IgA antibodies are known to eliminate bacteria and viruses, some of which could be cancer-causing organisms. So let's take a minute to summarize and pull together what we've learned together so far and transition to understanding the specific reasons why the gut microbiota plays a role in cancer risk. So looking at this part of the screen, we see that when you look at the right-hand side, there are various factors that we mentioned that can cause dysbiosis. And if that happens, that could lead to various mechanisms that are listed up here, including chronic inflammation, and so on, that can then lead to increased risk of colorectal cancer, DNA damage, inflammation, etc. And then when we take a look at this side of the screen, we see that alternatively, eubiosis, which is where you have a good balance in good versus bad gut bacteria, um, leads to various mechanisms that will help to prevent cancer. And so that includes a good nutrition, eating fiber-rich foods, and some of these other mechanisms that are noted here. And then if we're able to balance the gut bacteria really well, then that can enhance that gut barrier function. So that decreases issues with gut permeability, which is otherwise known in lay terms as a leaky gut. And by enhancing the gut barrier, we're able to decrease the risk of cancer, and it can also help to improve treatment, as I'll discuss briefly. And then when we go over here, we see that by colonizing good bacteria in a number of different ways, that can also improve immune function, which can also decrease stress, inflammation, and so on, that could trigger cancer. So let's talk about cancer and the gut microbiota. So certain gut microbiota have been implicated in the development of some types of cancer, such as colorectal cancer. They can cause inflammation and suppress the activity of immune cells, allowing colorectal cancer cells to form and grow. And this is something important to note because we do know that quite a proportion of cancers, it's estimated that like maybe about 30 to 35% of cancers are related to lifestyle risk, including diet, lack of physical activity, consuming too many calories, things like that. Um, and for certain types of cancers, that proportion, that percentage from lifestyle factors is even higher. And so the impact of things like nutrition and lifestyle in the gut microbiota may explain or help to explain some of the association there. So let's start with esophageal cancer. So the composition of bacteria within the esophagus may point to cancer risk. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, basically reflux disease, is a known risk factor for cancer of the esophagus, with approximately 6 to 14% of patients developing what's known as Barrett's esophagus, which is characterized by a change in the cells on the lining of the esophagus. And then a small percentage of those individuals will go on to develop esophageal cancer. So there is evidence that there's a higher percentage of gram-negative bacteria, which leads to higher levels of LPS, which is a molecule found in these types of bacteria, which activates an immune response, which eventually cascades to increased inflammation, which, as I've mentioned before, can increase the risk for cancer. And high levels of LPS have also been associated or linked to different types of chronic diseases, not just cancer. When it comes to stomach cancer, Helicobacter pylori is a gram-negative bacteria that is well known to cause stomach ulcers. And unfortunately, the damage that is done to the stomach may lead to cancer of the stomach. This bacteria can trigger the pathway to developing cancer in a number of ways, including inflammation. And then colorectal cancer is probably what many people um, largely associates with any impacts on the gut microbiota with good reason. So when there's an increase in the gut permeability in the colon, or what they call a leaky gut, that can occur due to dysbiosis, which can then lead to inflammation, which can be a trigger for colorectal cancer. Additionally, research indicates that there is evidence that bacteria normally associated with the mouth can also travel to the large intestines. And so that appears to be associated with colorectal cancer. So an example of that bacteria is this Fusobacterium nucleatum. And then Bacteroides fragilis, Escherichia coli, and Enterococcus facilis, a bacteria that may lead to damage of DNA, which can then lead to cancer development. And the Fusobacterium nucleatum may inhibit the death of cancer cells, basically the apoptosis of those cells, thereby increasing risk. Briefly, I'll just note that there are other cancers that appear to be associated with dysbiosis of the gut microbiota through the various gut organ axes, or through their metabolites that are generated by the action of various microbes in the gut. So these include breast cancer, prostate cancer, also cancers of the liver, kidney, and pancreas. Also, I'll briefly note that there is scientific evidence that gut microbiota may impact how individuals respond to medication. So researchers have found that some gut bacteria can influence responses to immunotherapy and chemotherapy. Some microbes may modify immune cell activity, whereas others may alter the effectiveness or toxicity of drugs. Now let's quickly explore some of the ways we may be able to reduce dysbiosis, thereby reducing cancer risk. As we have learned, there are various mechanisms that are summarized at the bottom of this slide that explain why dysbiosis may increase risk for cancer, including an increase in gut permeability. Also, it increases inflammation and may also damage the DNA, versus a balanced gut microbiome may decrease the risk of cancer. Some of the ways that cancer risk may be reduced include protection of the gut barrier function, reduction in inflammation and oxidation, and DNA repair. So there's quite a bit of research that has been done or is ongoing to better understand the impact of various foods, nutrients, and other bioactive compounds on gut microbes, along with other factors that were mentioned previously. In terms of what we know so far, plant foods and fermented foods are important. Prebiotics like fiber and phytochemicals like polyphenols, which are found in whole fruits, vegetables, whole grains, serve as substrates, basically like food for the gut microbes. And so they will break down those substances that are not digested in the upper GI tract to create various metabolites, as mentioned. Fermented foods may also serve as a direct source of microbes to the gut. They, however, there, however, is evidence that we're not sure how many of those probiotic substances or fermented live microbes reach the large intestines. There, however, is evidence that microbial fragments and cell parts may have their own independent effects on the gut. And these particular substances are known as postbiotics. So there's still a lot that we have to learn about the different foods or byproducts of foods that impact the gut microbiota. So why is fiber so important? Fiber is fermented by gut microbes, which leads to an increase in the abundance of beneficial bacteria. This leads to various mechanisms that can decrease cancer risk, including by inhibiting cell proliferation, for instance, inducing apoptosis or death of cancer cells, improving immune function, deactivating carcinogens, and also producing certain compounds like butyrate, which is a short chain fatty acid. And butyrate is really important to note in terms of uh, colorectal cancer risk. It is one of the metabolites of the fermentation of fiber in the large intestines, as mentioned. And so the way that butyrate can help to reduce colorectal cancer risk includes by moving feces along through the colon, inhibiting cell proliferation, reducing the initiation of cancer or increasing cancer cell death, and decreasing the risk of gut permeability. And so, just briefly as I finish up, I just wanted to mention the practical perspective because we eat multiple foods. We don't just eat individual foods. So, dietary patterns are important. So, a whole food plant-based dietary pattern that is characterized by fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, and water with decreased amounts of processed foods and animal food products is one of the ways you can increase some of the nutrients and bioactives that are known to decrease the risk of cancer, as noted here. Similarly, the Mediterranean dietary pattern is another dietary pattern that has been shown to decrease cancer risk. And it is also similar in that it's encouraging the intake of whole plant foods, a moderate amount of fish and seafood, especially fatty fish, and limiting animal food products, other animal food products, I should say. So some of the takeaways include research is still in its infancy. Um, Dysbiosis triggers several mechanisms related to cancer risk, so it's important to have a good balance of good bacteria versus bad bacteria, so to speak. And a dietary pattern rich in plant foods and limited in cancer-associated animal food products favorably impacts the gut microbiota. And for those of you who would like to do some more reading, I've included the references that I use for this presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Hetsky. And so um, we do have to be mindful of the little critters that are carrying on in our body and try to make sure that we have a healthy balance. And so thank you for that. So our next speaker would be Dr. Karika Weldon. So Dr. Karika Weldon is a Bermudan biochemist, and she founded the Bermuda Principal Foundation back home at her home. She's one of the youngest full-time lecturers at De Montfort University, and she will be here with us. And now she's also carrying on she's an entrepreneur and is doing molecular medicine in the Bermuda College at present. I'd like to welcome her today. She will be discussing on the power of tool and precision prevention. So, Dr. Rita Wilson, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Greetings all the way from Bermuda. I am really honored to be here. As was stated, I am a biochemist and geneticist. I did most of my training in the UK and was only brought back home because of COVID. I was in charge of all COVID testing for Bermuda, in charge of the strategy and the science advisor to the government. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that not just Bermuda, but as a region, we were not doing as much of the genetic research within the region. And so I created my company. So I crossed over to the dark side. I feel like having left academia, I'm now an entrepreneur and have Carry Genetics, which is short for Caribbean Genetics. And our whole goal is to put Caribbean genetics on the global map so that we are no longer left out of the databases that are being used to design drugs, and so that we can actually make sure we have precision medicine that is accessible for all of us in the region. And so I'm going to go through our gut health test. It's called Gut to Know and what that entails. And I'm also going to go through a little bit of what the report looks like in case that is of any interest, and how you can get involved in us building out a Caribbean gut microbiome genetic database. Okay, just checking. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so Gut to Know is our gut microbiome analysis kit. And as was so beautifully articulated by my co-presenter, we all know a lot more about gut microbiome before we came here. And just to re-emphasize that it is very personal to you. So everyone hosts their own ecosystem of trillions of bacteria and other microbiomes that makes up your own personal gut microbiome. Again, it's very unique, and it was described as is influenced by more things than you may have realized. So yes, your environment, yes, your diet, but also your lifestyle and medications. And it can influence a lot of other factors of our health. So that includes digestion, how we absorb nutrients, metabolism of food, and then our immune function. And so it's very well described, as was demonstrated earlier, that your gut health and your overall wellness is actually shaped by all of the bacteria and microbiomes that live within you. Okay, so I'd like to just touch a little briefly on the landscape of gut health and disease. But this is going to come from a slightly different perspective, from like a macro level. And so, did you know that in the US, and we use them kind of as a benchmark, the NIH found that 70 million people were affected by digestive diseases in the US in 2009, sorry. And that was over 20% of the population. So almost 1 in 5 people had a digestive issue. And if we can translate that to the Caribbean, just making that assumption, you're going to see that that's almost 9 million people that could be suffering from digestive diseases out of the 44 million people that we have in our wonderful islands. It is a very big issue. And we actually found that in Bermuda last year, this time, we actually launched like a gut health challenge. And in 10 days, I mean, mind you, Bermuda is very small. We're 65,000 people. But in 10 days, we had over 100 people sign up for that. And, people saying, like, I've never talked about it, but I do have health issues in my gut, and I would love to fix it, and how the different areas of their life were being affected, like sleep, for example. Now, from a health burden perspective, in terms of how it's costing to the healthcare system, we know that in the US alone, it was $120 billion was spent on gastrointestinal healthcare in 2018. Now, again, if we extrapolate that data to the Caribbean, we're looking at about $16 billion that can be saved per year. That's quite a lot of money. Now, if individuals, wanted to understand their gut health better so that they can maintain that good microbiome for them, then we can, slowly but surely reduce this burden. All right, so we all may know someone that actually is of suffering from a digestive condition. There are many. Some of these are more popular or more known to the average person than others. So that includes gastroesophageal reflux disease, peptic ulcer disease, irritable bowel syndrome, which has gotten a lot of coverage in the media recently, celiac disease, hemorrhoids, gastrointestinal bleeding, food intolerances, inflammatory bowel disease, colorectal cancer, gastrointestinal obstructions, malabsorption syndromes, and Crohn's disease. So there's so many different diseases that, again, just focusing on our gut can help to at least relieve some symptoms and fix. Now, I wanted to focus on a case study of how can actually focusing on gut health make a real impact on a certain chronic disease or a disease. So here we have got the gut microbiome and cirrhosis. And I know you might be saying, well, this is about cancer, but I want to share the holistic approach here. So there was some research that strongly suggested a connection between gut bacteria and cirrhosis, which is scarring of the liver. Now, hospital admissions for cirrhosis were thought to be linked to complications associated with changes in the gut microbiome. This was done over on 1,000 cirrhosis patients, and two were predicted to have about a 90-day hospitalization. And again, talking about cost savings, I'm in the business of trying to reduce the cost of healthcare. It is a huge regional concern, actually global concern. And here we saw that by performing gut microbiome analysis, they were able to predict and reduce hospitalizations. And there was a cost savings of between 47 to $97,000 per individual over the current standard of care for cirrhosis. Now, something that seems so trivial, and I know gut microbiome over here in Bermuda is kind of a new thing that people are kind of like talking about more. But who would have thought that if we just focused on that, that this could actually have a positive impact on the cost of healthcare and reduce their hospitalizations so that we can have more care for other people that need it. Now, this is a slide I really like. So, symptoms of poor gut health may not always be obvious. And I know that, again, in speaking to some of those people that signed up, they would mention some symptoms that we're all kind of used to hearing. So, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal discomfort, abdominal pain or cramps, irregular bowel movements, unexplained weight changes, heartburn and indigestion, and food intolerances. But these ones that are in the light blue and italicized, these are probably symptoms that you may not have been used to hearing, or your patients may think is attributed to something else, but could be related. So, skin issues, mood changes, fatigue and low energy, anxiety and depression. We know there's the gut brain connection, joint pain, disturbances, weak immunity, and brain fog. So it's not just ones that we kind of conventionally put with, oh, I have a gut issue. There's such a wide range of symptoms. And by actually tackling gut health and looking at it on a personal level, then you can see how this can be alleviating a multitude of symptoms that are actually could be leading to other diseases. All right, so just again to recap, so we all know that our gut microbiome is as unique as we are. We are all very much unique genetically. That's what makes us unique and makes us ourselves. Food affects us all very differently. Our gut microbiome is as unique as our thumbprint. And just to remind us that whenever we are eating food, actually the gut microbiome is doing about half the job, and the other half is being done by the enzymes that our body makes. And so it's very important that we understand what is needed for our own gut microbiome, and that you translate that over to your patients, that they are not using a one size fits all approach to try to fix any type of gut microbiome issue. So by analyzing your gut microbiome or your patient's gut microbiome, you can unlock the secrets to improving your health and well-being. And you can see you can get boost to the energy levels, you can have reduced hunger, improvement of quality of sleep, achieve a healthier weight, reduce the risk of those chronic health issues, improve concentration and focus, and of course, eliminate bloating and digestive discomfort, which is, again, one of the biggest symptoms that most people that I have come in contact with are trying to fix. So, again, having recognized that there was a gap, that we did not have a gut microbiome test that we could easily get, this was actually one of our first products that we brought to market, which is called Gut to Know. It is the first gut microbiome analysis kit that you can do at home that's offered within the Caribbean. And we are very proud to potentially work with anyone on this call. So what we're going to show you is that you can actually find a personalized report. So there's a deep dive into the composition and diversity of the gut microbiome of the person tested. It gives you easy to read report, and it also recommends certain foods you should be avoiding and certain foods that you should be eating so that you can correct your gut microbiome and get it into a good place. And it is all backed by the latest scientific research, and we want to make sure that we're giving you actionable health information that is accurate. Okay, so what comes in the kit is easy to read instructions, all the tools you need to collect the stool sample, and it has a prepaid envelope so you can send it away for analysis. Takes about 6 to 8 weeks. And I want to really dive into the reports. This is what I'm really excited to show you. So this is a sample report. So this is not from this particular person. So we have taken any names off, but I want to show you what you can get out of the report. All right, so a bit of a summary for the individual so they know what their microbiome is. And we do give results. There are 3 different levels. We have green, which is optimal. It means that you are compared to what's called a normal gut microbiome. And yeah, you are compared to a normal gut microbiome, and based on that comparison, you look like you're right in line. There is what we call common, where it's kind of in the middle, and you are doing okay, but it could be going in the wrong direction. And then we have red, which is needs improving. It's not where it should be at all, and you need to be able to focus on those areas to get better. We do also have a survey that gets asked so we can capture some of these important information to get a profile of the individual, because the result is actually tailored so that it is considering, your age, your gender, your lifestyle, so that it can incorporate all the information into what it's recommending for you. Okay, so it does give you an overall score so that okay, am I good or not? Obviously this person is in optimal and is green, so that's a good sign. It would also let you know the variety of bacteria that are present. It goes into FODMAP, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it also looks at the average fatty acid chain production. Again, it gives you a score for your bacterial diversity. It lets you know how your microbiome is balanced, and then it will tell you your enterotype as well. Okay, so there are 5 functions of the microbiome that if you forget anything I've said today, that I would love for you to remember. So one is your food intake, and this is the quality of your diet that will modulate the composition of your gut microbiome or microbiota. The bioavailability of food depends on its nutritional quality. So obviously, the more fresher the food is, the more richer it is. So obviously, trying to avoid the fast foods and having more fruits and vegetables. And so that can be picked up based on a gut microbiome test and given a score. You have neuropsychological abilities. And again, this is one of the parts of gut health that I find really captivating, because it's not an intuitive thought that many people have, that our second brain is actually our gut. There is a really clear, proven connection between the gut and the brain. And the gut is one of the essential pillars of our health and its maintenance, both physically and mentally. Taking care of gut microbiome also means taking care of your mental balance. As you can see, for this particular sample report, this is not so great and it needs to be improved. Physical capacity. So this is where we're looking at the microorganisms in your microbiome that can influence your physical abilities and be the key to improving performance and endurance. As you probably well know, that athletes are very keen on their gut microbiome and want to make sure that they are on top of it. Immunity, which I would say is probably one of the most important features when it comes to those who are encountering cancer or going through any type of disease. You want to make sure that your immune system is as strong as it can be. And so, again, the gut microbiome helps protect us from pathogens by participating in the integrity of the gut barrier. Gut bacteria and the immune system communicate continuously to build an effective barrier capable of avoiding deleterious inflammatory responses. And then last but not least, as we all know, digestion. As I mentioned earlier, it does have the job of all digesting of all of our food. To make sure that we can digest it properly, we need to make sure that we have the right balance of microorganisms in our gut. Again, in addition, they facilitate the absorption of nutrients and participate in the synthesis of certain vitamins. And so it is not just important to have it so that you don't have a tummy ache, but so that you actually have the nutrients that you need to survive. Now, this is a very long report. You can see it's 28 pages. I'm not going to go through each page, I'm very happy to send this through if there is interest, but I want to just quickly go through so you can see that actually each of those 5 sections is broken down even further and giving more scores so that the individual can know exactly where they need to focus and what needs to be worked on. So under food intake, you have prebiotic intake, you have intake diversity and nutritional quality of intake. Under neuropsychological abilities, you have ability to concentrate, quality of sleep, which again is one of the biggest ones that I have been encountered with. You have resistance to stress and anxiety. Again, another big one that I get asked about. And then cognitive abilities and memory. Under physical capacities, we have the vitamin K, which again, as we mentioned, is actually very necessary for the gut microbiome to create, heart and blood vessels, and then resistance to stress. Under immunity, it goes into the immune system, antioxidants, intestinal inflammations, and allergy defense. And then lastly, under digestion, it goes into the acids and then bloating and gas sections and gives scores. Now, I did mention this earlier, it does go into a little bit more. So it looks at short chain fatty acids, which is a very important part of our gut microbiome. So fiber, as we know, is broken down by certain bacteria in our gut, and then that is producing these short chain fatty acids. So it will give you a score for all of them. And then there are certain bacteria of choice, and some of these were mentioned earlier by the first presenter. And so you can get to see, do you have these positive bacteria in your gut microflora so that you know that, okay, you're doing a good job, or are some of them missing? And so maybe you need to supplement your diet with certain either foods or different biotics so that you can actually get these bacteria. And in the same vein, it also shows you, do you have certain bacteria that have a negative impact on your gut health and your overall well-being? And again, so you can try to see how you can avoid them or get rid of them. And then there are just some general interests or genera of interest that are known, and you want to be able to know if you have them or not. FODMAP I did mention as well, and it stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polos. And they are short chain carbohydrates or sugars that are found in our diet. And again, they are interesting and important to know because some of them have some issues when it comes to bloating, and they can cause gas and even pain in some people that cannot handle them. And then my favorite part, as I mentioned before, is it actually recommends for you what foods you should avoid and what foods you should eat. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be nice to you. I have had my gut health tested, and it ruined my day because it told me that I should not be eating as much red meat as I was eating. So it is going to be very nitty-gritty. It gets you where it hurts, but again, it's necessary to improve gut health. So it is broken down and first tells you what foods to eat, and it breaks it down per different trait that is within the larger report. So you can actually see which foods would be helping which part of your health, for your gut health. Okay, so it goes through and it then enters the phase where it tells you what foods to avoid. And so it will tell you that, again, you should be avoiding, mine had red meat in it. And so it tells you what you should avoid so that you can actually obviously try to reduce the negative, but again, gives you a lot of options on food that you can eat so you can try to correct it. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention as well is that all of this is not including or considering what we eat in the Caribbean because we don't have the data. So that is one of the big things that we are trying to include, and would love to talk to anyone that would want to help us with that. Towards the end of the report, it does give you the distribution of the different phyla that is found in your gut, and it goes right down to list all the different bacteria that are found in your gut, and what the actual analysis is based on, and it will tell you the different percentages of all of these different bacteria so that you can have a look if there's any of interest that you would like to see are there. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, we are building our Caribbean research database. We do not know much about Caribbean gut health. We know for sure that, as we mentioned earlier, the environment, our diet, are very much factors in what happens in our gut health, as is medication. And we want to be able to look at what does that look like in the Caribbean context, because we eat a lot of different foods than other regions. We have a different environment, and then our genetics is also different. And so we want to be able to understand it a lot better. And this brings me to the end of my section of the presentation. If anyone has got to know what is going on in their gut health or the gut health of their patients, we look forward to working with you. This is something that I have found to be enlightening, having had my own gut health tested. And the beautiful thing is that you can actually make a change and test again so you can actually see if there are improvements. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weldon. Thank you so much. It's very, um, I really am also an advocate for really getting our own data for the Caribbean. I mean, it's wonderful that we can rely on some other countries, but for us to solve some of the problems that we have, we need to have more um, precision in it. It's an opportunity that we have to really invest in our knowledge. So thank you again so much on that. So our final speaker for today is Dr. Tamara Green. Dr. Tamara Green is uh, is a palliative care physician and psychosocial oncological consultant. Um, uh, she has also been started a new group called the Doing Life with Others. She's part of the Caribbean Cancer Portal, helps a lot with that. As begin as a project lead for the Caribbean-wide Precision Nutrition Therapy Program, um, and has done her studies with, of course, University of the West Indies, Jamaica, the University of Birmingham, and Harvard University. And so I would like to welcome Dr. Green to talk a little bit about feelings. You're muted a little.
Muted. All right, can you see my screen? Share screen. Good afternoon, everyone. We're really happy to have everyone listening to their gut this afternoon and coming to join us on this webinar. I need a little help. Where do I share my screen? Carl, where did you go? Oh, share. Okay, got it. Microsoft PowerPoint. And thank you, Dr. Celine and Dr. Carrico, for doing such a lovely presentation and for partnering with us on this new project, Doing Life with Others. All right, so let's go. 10 years ago, I had a memorable experience with a colleague. While introducing me to a new work area, a new workspace, she said, if you want to buy food, you can purchase your lunch at the canteen, but I can think of better things to spend my money on. Now, when she said that, it was immediately funny, but not so strangely. Her sentiments for not having an enjoyable relationship with food resonated with me. I mean, prior to that time, I could not identify a favorite food that I would want to eat on special occasions, or a favorite food that I would delight to eat forever, for a week, or whatever it is. Eating behavior is one of our most complex motivational behaviors. And so today, I am going to introduce the important role of nutrition psychology in personalized nutrition, in personalized cancer prevention. So this presentation is not intended to be an exhaustive, but it's going to be illustrative using two cases, the case of my favorite food and the case of the Ozempic effect. Now, I wanted to mention my takeaways at the start because I'm going to be reiterating these takeaways throughout the entire presentation. So getting nutritional education or even knowing your gut microbiome is not enough. Using the latest miracle drug is not enough. Precision nutrition therapy is what is enough to genetically silence or hereditary and or cultivated cancer risk. Now, I'm going to ask as much as possible for us to interact using the chat. So what is your favorite food? What is your dominant food preference? Do you have a favorite meal? Just type it in the chat. Since having that memorable experience 10 years ago, I've had two favorites. One is salmon head soup, and the other is cow tongue and beans. A bit strange, but please just drop it in the chat. What is your favorite food? So one's ability to roll the tongue for years was realized as being unique and undeliberate. And that is how our food preferences are. They're unique and undeliberate. But in more recent years, it has been discovered that anyone can actually learn to roll their tongues. And so our favorite foods or food preferences are as evolved as learning to become a tongue roller. Now, our eating behaviors, as was my example, my testimonial, originates in our guts. Our gut feelings are either hunger or intuition. And I'm going to say that another way. Our eating behavior is either initiated by a physiological energy deficit. So you feel your sugar drop. You actually feel low. Your energy has fallen. And it's also initiated by a desire to eat something nice. And in science and medicine, we call this homeostasis and hedonic signals. So it's not just what is happening in your head as a thought. There are biochemical things that are causing us to feel like we want to eat something nice. And that is the focus of my presentation, hedonic signals. Hedonic signals are what cause us to uniquely have a food preference. And that involves our brain, peripheral organs, which is massively contributed by our gut. So our gut is a massive part of that, but not the only part. And our food preference is managed through our executive control. And I needed to state that outside of just saying that it is the brain, because our executive control is that area behind our foreheads that are responsible for us to think logically, make decisions, make choices, and be temperate or intemperate. And we call that the prefrontal cortex. Hedonic eating pathways share hardwired circuits for many other decision makings and other biologic circuits. And we're gonna speak a little bit more on this. Now, why do we have favorite foods? Or what informs our food preference? Fact number one is that our favorite foods are culturally defined. For example, one group favors richly spicy foods, and another group cannot imagine a meal being tasty if it's not well seasoned with garlic, herb, thyme. And I think I may be resonating with a lot of Caribbean folks on this call. As a matter of fact, Kentucky Fried Chicken in Jamaica is like none other in the world. Fact number two, it is true that some foods have an inherent likability. So a particular food has a higher hedonic property than others. And this is because its indulgence factor speaks to how sweet or how much fat is in the food itself. So for example, creamy foods, foods that are fried, like fried chicken, pastries, fruits, candies are inherently more palatable. Fact number three is that our favorite foods are sentimentally acquired, whether subconsciously or consciously, to our emotional memories. And I'm going to invite you in a little bit more here. Can anyone recall memories linked to a favorite food? Can anyone remember being rewarded with ice cream after acing an exam, or receiving a sweet snack to placate your restlessness during Sunday services when you were a child? Can anyone recall receiving a slice of grandma's sweet potato pudding after being chastised or scolded by your parents? I'm sure we're having favorite food thoughts linking to emotional memories as I'm speaking with you. Now, I'm going to spend a little longer on this last fact, which is our gut-brain axis, in the next 2 to 3 slides. Now, before we were born, that phase of life is called the origin of health and disease. Our mother's nutrition has an important an important space in epigenetically programming our genes. I'm going to say that a different way. Maternal nutrition affects the embryo's genome. So although you have the sperm contributing and the female's egg contributing to the genetic pool of the embryo, the nutrition of the mother can epigenetically affect that gene, that genetic pool. And I'm going to just share with you 2 important examples. Maternal hypercaloric intake, which is essentially when a pregnant mother eats ad lib. So, you know, oftentimes our pregnant mothers have cravings. The research is showing that when our mothers eat willy-nilly, ad lib, as they feel the urge, they eat whatever, and it amounts to high calories, that is linked to hedonic states of deficiency in their offspring. So we're seeing strong links in maternal hypercaloric intake to conditions like depression, substance abuse, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. To the other extreme, intrauterine growth restriction, which occurs when our mothers aren't adequately nourished, is linked to hedonic states of heightened response to sweet taste. And practically, this is manifested in diabetes type 2, cancer, and other chronic illnesses. And we have the population-wide study, like the Dutch study, which can be easily typed into Google as one of our foundation researches that found that at points of starvation, maternal starvation, intrauterine maternal starvation, there was a uptick in chronic diseases of those offspring. Now, as we continue to age and the baby is birthed, the microorganisms that colonize the gut come from the breast milk. Neurologically, at age 6 months, the babies are starting to develop food preferences. They're starting to develop food habits. And that is why, if we recall, our midwives encourage us to be careful in how we introduce vegetables first and not fruits first. It's because we're actually wiring the baby's food preference. We're actually informing the baby's food preference. And so repeated exposures to healthy foods and taste have been shown to modify the baby's innate preferences. So if the mother was either overnourished or undernourished, the evidence is showing that if there is intentionality in feeding the baby healthy foods, there can be a change in what they prefer. And so as we introduce food varieties that complement breast milk, so we have animal-derived formulas, we have meats, we have plants, we have artificial non-food additives that we give to our babies. We have genetically altered foods that we give to our babies. All of these foods shift the population of gut microbiomes in our babies' guts. Now, as we continue to age, neurologically, there are important psychosocial maturations happening. And I'm looking forward to doing another webinar that would be entitled Cancer, Gut Microbiome, and Social Health. All right, but we're not going to elaborate on that first point. So as we continue to age, our predominant food choices actually establish our gut microbiome. And so where there was bidirectional flow of information, so the longest nerve, which is the vagal nerve, communicates with our gut. That is the highway for gut-brain axis. And so we see as we age, the informational flow is still bidirectional, but it starts to become predominantly gut to brain. So instead of the larger flow being brain to gut, it becomes gut to brain. So there's greater communication, greater flow of information from the gut. And so this is just an image sort of summarizing what I just said. There are exposures, whether external to the mother or internal to the mother throughout the life course. And these epigenetically cause non-communicable disorders such as cancer. Now on to the Ozempic effect. Now Ozempic is a group of drugs that is the latest craze. As a matter of fact, I was in awe initially at what Ozempic was doing. Ozempic belongs to a synthetic group of analogs to GLP-1. And GLP-1 is short for glucagon-like, am I saying it right? Glucagon-like peptide, right? Now, this group of drugs mimic what is inherent to us in what's happening in our guts. So it belongs to a group of gut hormones that communicate with our nervous systems. So the Ozempic effect is shown to manage weight, treat type 2 diabetes, reduce the risk of 13 obesity-related cancers, and also treat addictive behaviors. Now, this last bit was a bit of a surprise. Addictive behaviors, what's the connection? This is a miracle drug. But there is a continuation of that effect because Ozempic is not like a diabetic or a hypertensive pill. It has to be stopped. And when it is stopped, it causes refractory weight gain. That means you go back to gaining weight, and sometimes this weight gain is resistant. And the Ozempic effect also has suicidal thoughts. So there is an increase in suicidality. Now, what's happening? This is happening because the GLP-1 receptors are not only in the gut or in our peripheral organs, but they're also interspersed throughout our brains. It's interspersed along not only the homeostatic pathways for our nutrition, but it's also scattered throughout the hedonic signals. And that's why persons who are on Ozempic find the benefit of Ozempic to extend to helping them to quit smoking, quit gambling, quit alcoholism. And so in concluding my point on the Ozempic effect, I need us to understand, just as my previous two speakers mentioned, that a healthy gut microbiome, a diet that is high in fiber, has the bacteria that is responsible for creating GLP-1 like peptides. And this was found in studies that looked at the guts of vegetarians and persons who employ mostly a plant-based diet. These persons were secreting GLP-1 like peptides. And this speaks to the beauty of our gut microbiome. It's our personal pharmacist. And this last point about the orobiome is important for me to mention. So Alzheimer's disease has been found to have a link to a particular bacteria that resides in the mouth. Now, this bacteria releases enzymes. So first of all, the bacteria enters the blood vessels. It penetrates the blood vessels of our heads, and it gets into the circulation of our brain. This bacteria releases enzymes that are neurodegenerative. So the neural cells are pretty much eaten away and implicated in the formation of Alzheimer's type dementia. Despite our best efforts to brush our teeth, this bacteria resides in our oral cavity by virtue of just consuming a predominant diet of sweets. So despite your best effort to brush, this bacteria just lives there. And so that links to the GLP-1 like peptides that are found in persons who predominantly eat high fiber diets. Our gut microbiome is a gift to us that can epigenetically and immediately cause an effect in reversing a lot of non-communicable diseases. Now, I'm coming to a close as I look at the mechanisms of hedonic dysregulation. or unhealthy diets, or overconsumption of ultra-processed foods, or overconsumption of highly processed foods like our sodas or snacks, as well as obesity. And I want to just put a plug in to say that obesity is not just what visually obtains. Any disproportionate body profile, any body profile, sorry, that has a disproportionate amount of fat is of concern, as is obesity, because the extra fat, the extra adiposity is neuroinflammatory. And remember, we're talking about the gut-brain axis. It blunts the higher cognitive functioning of our hippocampus and our prefrontal cortex. And if you remember, I mentioned that our prefrontal cortex is that area behind our brain that empowers us to make better decisions. So I don't want to labor that point, so let me quickly go on. It also mutes the homeostatic responses. So remember I said earlier that gut feelings are not just based on our blood sugar dropping low, but it's also based on our intuition. So here we're seeing that unhealthy diets and obesity not only blunt our ability to choose, but it also muddles with our physiology. Next slide. And so in closing, I introduce to you doing life with others, because wouldn't it be great if we had a way to eat any food and it tasted like our favorite food, especially the healthy stuff? Doing life with others is a space, it's a practice that challenges old nutrition facts with emerging fields of eating behavior, like time-restricted eating and intermittent fasting. Doing life with others looks at old dichotomies of mind-body and focuses on whole body care as being inclusive of psychosocial therapy. Doing life with others is a multidisciplinary approach with dietitians, psycho-oncologists, and behavioral therapists. And it's this multidisciplinary approach that is enough to genetically silence or hereditary and cultivated risk for cancer. And so pointedly, this project uses curated laboratory diagnostics, looking at our allostatic load and our gut microbiome. We use nutritional coaching, and we identify each client's eating behavior dysfunctions. Just as I started with my testimonial, we are individually rife with eating behavior dysfunctions. And we look at these dysfunctions as it pertains to the person's process of finding food to eat, consuming the food, and actually stopping the meal. And so we are trying to rehabilitate a cohort into eating more mindfully and intuitively. And that is going to be achieved through harnessing each individual's personality, their strengths, to see which one. Do I need to be more of an intuitive eater, or do I need to be more of a mindful eater? All right, so we invite you to click on the link to get screened, or contact us at info@doinglifewithothers to get some more information. Those are for your further reading. They make very detailed, awesome reading, and I just want to thank you for all following your gut feelings and coming here this evening. Thank you. That's my last slide, Cara.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for a very enlightening presentation. Um, and thank all of our participants for coming. Thank you all for your good behavior. So now we're gonna have the question and answer sessions. I'm going to allow you all to unmute. Um, and uh, right now we have about 15 minutes. Is that right for us to do that, right? So you just direct your question, try to make it one question at a time so that, and listen to the question so that you don't, ask the same question over. And I just leave the floor open for anyone who would like to ask one of our panelists a question. I mean, I had a burning question. I'll start it off. So again, thank you all for this wonderful conversation. Um, so yeah, our region is pretty diverse. While we have some things that we kind of share, it's pretty diverse, and but yet where we get our foods from, where we either since we're a little heavy on importing foods, where we get our foods from kind of is the same, right? Um, what are some of the this question then is for Dr. Heskey, but I also want to hear Dr. Wilden's input on this. What are some of the, I would say, food choices that you realized, options that we've had available that you think is lending us towards, tending us towards, um, a poor gut biome, an imbalance in that biome, and therefore, Dr. Green, I'll come to you with a follow-up on
Yeah, so and I'll clarify. I'm from Antigua. I've lived in different Caribbean islands, but I've been living in the US for quite a while. So most of my food knowledge in the region is in Antigua and Barbuda, but I do know a bit about some other islands. And from my observations, I will say that depending on where you live and how much money you have, a lot of imported food is very accessible. Some of that imported food is really good quality. Some of it is high in a lot of added sugar, added salt, highly processed. And of course, we have fast food that's very available. And then one of the trends I've noticed is that a lot of people don't cook at home anymore. They eat out a lot, even if it's like a roadside restaurant stall, that type of thing. So the quality varies quite a bit. But basically, if people are eating foods that are high in red meat, processed meats, certain other animal products to a certain extent, also highly processed food items, those are going to increase the likelihood of dysbiosis. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, as has been mentioned, if you're eating whole food items, and I put whole in front of that because 100% fruit juice is not entirely bad per se, but because of how it is processed, you're missing like some of the fiber and things like that. So if you're able to eat more whole plant foods, they have a lot of different benefits for gut health and other areas of health in terms of reducing cancer risk. And oh, one other thing I wanted to mention, and I was going to mention this before too, I want to make a particular note that a lot of traditional foods that are consumed in the Caribbean are actually pretty good, the plant foods. And so there has been this transition away from the traditional type of diet to a more what they call westernized type of diet, which sometimes is associated with having more access and wealth. But I think it's important for us to redirect people in the region back to a lot of traditional foods. There are some foods that might be considered problematic, like salted fish, but things that you can do to increase the healthfulness of those food items and allow people to continue to eat those traditional foods that do provide important nutrients in our diets.
So I want to add to that. In Bermuda, unfortunately, we are 21 square miles. So not that big, and pretty much 99% of our food is imported. There is kind of like anecdotally this saying that we get all the bad food from the US. Don't know how true that is, just the stuff that didn't pass. So, I mean, there is this kind of notion that we're probably not getting the best quality food that we should. There is a kind of emphasis on homegrown, but obviously that's quite limited when you don't have much places to grow. I think the other thing I wanted to say, I see a question that I also would like the answer to. Should we be eating less KFC? One thing what we should do and then what we actually do. But I wanted to like kind of piggyback on that and actually to this crowd, all of us who are in the health profession, we're also very busy, right? And one of the things I've been kind of consciously trying to focus on it more is myself. Because you can be so busy just trying to focus on everybody else that you forget about you. And, you say, well, let me just grab something that is just really quick and easy. And that's, to also add to Dr. Heskey's point, we're not cooking at home. We're just always on the go. And so I think there is this kind of shift culturally that we're more working class and we're working around the clock that you kind of get away from just sitting down and eating a healthy meal and finding something that is good to eat, not just the fastest thing you can get. So yeah, that's my kind of two main points is unfortunately we're a bit small. Some of us, some islands are a lot bigger, they can grow a lot of food, but the ones that don't, we just kind of get whatever we're given. And I implore everyone to focus on their own health as well as their patients, because you can only pour from a full cup. If your cup is empty, you can't help nobody.
Thank you. And I do think the follow-up question to Dr. Green would have been, and I see I have some questions I want to get to. I think Dr. Um, Adewa, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. She would be has a question. Dr. Green, it's that given the relationship that we have and the cultural um uh, connectivity that we have to our food. So as you mentioned, Jamaica being the will have its own type of KFC. I would say I'm from Trinidad, and we're like, yeah, so now KFC is the best in Grenada. They all say their KFC is the best, and this is and as we recognize that battered with flour, fried in oil chicken with oil said is probably not the best thing to have as a constant in our diet. But the joy that we have from sharing, what are some of the ways we can help, let's say, train ourselves away from that, or at least to be mindful of the impact of.
So, Carl, mindful eating is contextually driven. So it's being aware, it's a practice of being aware of the senses, the sensation involved in eating, smelling, seeing, because some of us are ambience related food eaters. If the ambience isn't nice, you don't enjoy the meal. So that's what I mean by eating behaviors. Eating behaviors, I don't mean eating disorders like anorexia. We all have dysfunctions in eating behaviors. We eat too fast, or we eat mindlessly. We just pick, or we're stress eaters. There are a list of eating behaviors. So if you are going to eat more mindfully, I have one suggestion, because I do see the KFC question in the chat. Instead of buying a bucket of biscuits with that bucket of fried chicken, could I go home and cook some yam? And I'm eating that with the bucket of fried chicken. And so I'm getting a good amount of fiber. It's not the entire meal being plant-based, but or could I, instead of buying the soda, substitute it with some fruits. So we're eating a banana and an apple and something else, a glass of water before we chunk down the KFC. So I'm not saying, and that is it about nutritional advice. Nutritional advice is do, don't. Do, don't. Humans don't operate like that. We operate by incorporating things that fit our context and fit our personalities. And intuitive eating is a little different, but someone might ask that question.
Thank you. So, Dr. Adwa, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Green and colleagues, for such an informative, insightful um, panel. I thoroughly enjoyed every single one of the presentations. I'm curious about this question of gut health and the extent to which it moves beyond. I feel like we're starting at the consumption patterns as opposed to the food production patterns that we've adopted. So the overuse of pesticides in just, even if we do resort to eating whole grains and all of these things, right? I feel like, what are your thoughts on, like, does it begin at the choice, or does it extend further? Like, are we stepping forward a little bit too much when really we should be thinking about correcting the harms that are being done to our food, in terms of the overuse of pesticides in farming practices, agricultural practices in Jamaica? We use a lot of pesticides, and we don't even think about researching the practices that we had prior to, the introduction of pesticides. So pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, what is that doing to our food? And is there something to be done in that regard as well before we even get to the point of making conscious choices about what we eat?
So I'll just quickly state, because with my limited knowledge, but I do know that the soil microbiome is related to the food production in terms of the quality. And so there is research there. And another thing that we know is that the microbiome, the gut microbiome of people 100 years ago had a lot more diversity than today. So that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I'll add to that as well. So, big shout out to Dr. Stani from Guadeloupe. We're actually currently doing a prostate cancer study across about 10 different countries, which includes most of the countries I see everyone is from here. We are also doing Guadeloupe, and primarily one of the things that we're including is pesticides. There's a particular one that has been shown to be linked to prostate cancer, and we're going to look at that actually from a germline DNA perspective. So how does it impact, or has it impacted how their inherited DNA is passed on? But we hadn't thought about the gut health. So you've now just given us a new line of research. But it is on my radar that pesticide is an issue because the pesticide that we're actually focusing on in Guadeloupe hasn't been used for quite a while, but it has a long half-life, and so it's still in the soil and could still be getting in our food. And it's a very, very, very valid point. And it's unfortunately something that I would say we as a region got the short end of the stick, because sometimes it had been banned elsewhere and then it was still being used in the Caribbean. So yeah, thank you for giving me another research project.
And I also want to just add a different perspective, Doc, because the use of pesticides and the different chemicals that are added to our soil was because of a need. That need was because, and I'm going to speak sort of generically, it was because the population grew impatient of doing backyard farming. It's because of a need to mass produce. It was because of a need for me to go into the supermarket and want to see my tomatoes looking perfect. So it comes back to me. It comes back to me making a personal choice in my community, in my family, to start backyard farming. We need to, and I hope I'm not taking it as I tend to, find the link to social justice. When we are able to examine the origins of a practice, I think we're better able to tackle it without being sort of adversarial or thinking that we have to start a new wheel. It's just people. It's people and behaviors. We became impatient. We wanted more. We wanted more. We wanted a lot more to make profit, but at the expense of our health. So I hope that adds another perspective.
Thank you all so much. I have a few questions here from before in the chat. We have Kirti Singh who asked, is there a difference of eating behaviors dysfunction among young and elderly? And another one just kind of related to that is the thoughts on taking omeprazole for good and its effects on gut health.
I can tackle the first one. The age and stage of life, yes, has different eating behavior disorders or dysfunctions. For example, an elderly person who does not have their family around them is less likely to enjoy a meal or even have a full meal. That is an eating behavior dysfunction. A younger person, and whoever asked that question, I'm going to ask you to just send us an email at Doing Life with Others, because we're really planning a part 2 that looks at social health at the biological level of the cancer gut microbiome link. Younger persons, like adolescents, are affected by what is happening in the immediate social context. My friends are eating this. I will look hip if I'm, getting a pizza. Let's buy a pizza. So the psychosocial constructs that feed that hedonic signal is different. So when we're talking about hedonic signal, in the brain, we're talking about what releases the dopamine that makes you feel happy and good. That is surrounded with that eating behavior. And so it does, not going to belabor the point, it does look different for those who are younger and those who are older.
Thank you. And I guess the impact of omeprazole for good on gut health. That is
Um,
from that is from Camilla Joseph.
so I'm going to take a jab at that one. It's not good to single out a drug. There are, as my slide showed, there are external exposures and internal exposures. Our gut microbiome, think of it as this, our gut microbiome is our versatile pharmacist. You have an external pharmacy coming in that can either dampen your gut microbiome. Remember, we spoke quite a lot on the immune response, the immune protection that you get from the gut microbiome, et cetera, et cetera. So whatever is coming in externally can serve a short-term purpose while you're working on rehabilitating your gut microbiome to correct it over a longer term. I hope that makes sense. And as Dr. Celine mentioned in her presentation, the research that is afoot in cancer treatment shows that our gut microbiome can actually synergize some chemotherapeutics or have the opposite effect.
Thank you, thank you. So we only have about 2 to 3 minutes of time left there to go towards the end. So just this but this will be our final question, which would be from Marta, right? Um so it's for Dr. Heskey. The question is, what will be the steps in research Thank you, Becky. What will be the next step in research? Like, what will be next?
Yeah, a lot of things have to be researched, I would say. So in terms of cancer, at least from what I could observe, is that even though there seems to be an association there, based on what they've seen so far, there hasn't been a lot of research to say, okay, this is exactly directly what's causing the cancer in some cases. So they just know, for instance, if they take the feces of individuals with a certain type of cancer, they have higher proportions of certain bacteria. So it could be a disease effect, or it could be the bacteria causing the disease effect. So the direction for some of those associations is not known, and we can't really do clinical trials in some cases because there's ethical issues at times, especially when it comes to like cancer research. So we need large longitudinal studies to examine some of those impacts, which I think a lot of the research has shifted a bit away from that. Um, Hopefully we do get some more findings in that area, but that's just one aspect. But there's a lot of research that has to be done because for one, they haven't identified all of the bacterium. They probably won't. Um, there's so much that is still not known. Um, but research is ongoing. It's a hot topic area of research, even just in nutrition, which is my area of expertise. I know in terms of medicine, it's also become pretty popular. So if you can ask any question, we probably need more research on it, is what I would say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will actually end it here because we have had a wonderful session. I would like to thank all of our participants for coming and being so engaging. Definitely special thanks to Dr. Heskey, Dr. Weldon, and Dr. Green for your insightful conversation on this. It opening up the idea that one, we need more research for our region. We definitely need to be mindful and intentional in the way we eat, and that as we think about our region and those who would like to follow our example, as we try to take a little more charge over what we what we expose our population to, um, and married with the context that we enjoy our food, and that our food also has different changes on our psychology, and the way we feel about ourselves. So again, thank you so much for everything. Thank each and every one of you. So I have placed inside the chat again the email, which is in info@doinglifewithothers for those who would like a CME request. And again, I wish each and every one of you a good evening. Thank you so much. So take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.